Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a medical case study that completely blurs the lines between the mind and the body. It's a story where a young man's inner demons, well, they turned out to be horrifyingly real, forcing us to question everything we think we know about identity. So let's start with a really unsettling question. What if the voices in your head weren't just in your head? Let's dive into the story of a young man named Andrew, whose internal world was so much more crowded and frankly terrifying than anyone could have ever guessed. Our story kicks off back in 1985. We're introduced to this quiet boy named Andrew, who is living this really transient life in a trailer. His family was just constantly on the move. Indiana, Alabama, Texas, a life pretty much in perpetual motion. Now, Andrew's childhood was really defined by that instability, and on top of that, he was dealing with relentless, severe bullying at school. But something else was going on, something much more sinister. He'd have these blackouts, waking up covered in dirt and mud with zero memory of how he got there. And then, the kids who tormented him, they just started disappearing. See, here's the thing. From a very, very young age, Andrew was never truly by himself. He had three very distinct voices in his head. And these weren't just whispers or fleeting thoughts. They were fully formed personalities, and in a way, they were his only real companions. First up, there was Simmy. She was the encouraging one, his protector, really. A supportive voice that was this small, constant glimmer of light in what was a pretty dark existence. Then you had Eminon. Now, this voice was different, a wisecracking, kind of mysterious companion. His commentary always had this sharper, more vengeful edge to it. Eminon saw the injustice Andrew was facing and was always hinting that payback was coming. And last, there was No Name. This one was a mostly silent but incredibly heavy presence. No Name would only speak to deliver these really cryptic, weedy commands, a voice that seemed to be pushing for some kind of final reckoning. Something like this, all this internal pressure, it can't stay bottled up forever. It was all building to a breaking point. To the day that the chaos inside Andrew finally erupted into the outside world with just horrifying consequences. So after years of just escalating abuse, Andrew finally hit that point. And with his two brothers, DJ and Philip, just watching, he walked onto that schoolyard for what was supposed to be a final confrontation with his main bully. But this wasn't just a schoolyard fight. It was a complete massacre. In what seemed like a state of pure rage, or maybe something else entirely, Andrew attacked his bullies with two machetes. His brothers could only stand there, frozen in terror, as he decapitated the lead tormentor, Matt. And then, as the wail of sirens cut through the air, his world just faded to black. The next thing Andrew knows, he's waking up, and he's 21 years old. He's a patient at an Indiana mental facility, and his life has become this fog of heavy medication and just endless therapy sessions. To the doctors, it seemed pretty clear-cut, a severe case of mental illness. They treated his condition as purely psychological. But even through that medicated haze, for Andrew, the voices were still there. Muffled, maybe, but they were never, ever truly gone. So years go by in this monotonous cycle. But then, a new series of CAT scans revealed something impossible. Doctors started seeing these physical anomalies in his brain, readings that just defied every single psychiatric diagnosis they had on file. And this is where the story takes its most shocking turn. Surgeons, going in to investigate these anomalies, they made a grotesque discovery. We're talking about the biological remnants of other human beings, eyes, teeth, and flesh, literally embedded deep inside Andrew's own brain. The diagnosis had a name: fetus in fetus. It's an incredibly rare medical anomaly, 1 in a million. The truth wasn't psychological at all, it was biological. Back in the womb, Andrew had unknowingly absorbed his twin siblings, and he had been carrying their physical remains inside of him his entire life. So you can imagine, this biological revelation just changes everything, right? It forces a complete reevaluation of Andrew's entire life. What was always seen as a symptom of psychosis, well, now it had a potential physical origin. And this is where it all just clicks into place. With this new information, the voices suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. Look at the connection here. On the left, you had the psychological mystery, and on the right, the biological reality. Simmy, that female voice, was likely his absorbed sister. Eminon and No Name, his two absorbed brothers. They weren't just hallucinations, they were the perceived consciousness of the siblings he physically carried within him. Armed with this horrific truth, Andrew's last years in the asylum weren't about getting better in any traditional sense. They became a quest to understand what exactly he was. So he started to formulate a final plan. Not a plan of escape, but one of resolution. He dove into books, biology, psychology, philosophy, trying to comprehend his own impossible existence. He even tried to connect with them, sketching what he imagined their faces to be, thinking about the lives they never got to live. He came to believe the only way to silence the storm was to confront the very core of his being. And then one night, in the quiet of his room, that internal battle reached its inevitable, violent conclusion. He screamed, a declaration to himself and to the presences that had lived inside him for his entire life. A final decision had been made. In a final and truly bizarre act, shouting a classic cartoon catchphrase of all things, he slammed his head onto an upright pen, ending his own life. It was a shocking act of finality, an act that the police would later, very strangely, label a homicide. But maybe the most chilling detail of all was the scene he left behind. His face wasn't one of agony or despair. It was a look of final, peaceful, or maybe even triumphant release, a large, haunting smile. Andrew's story leaves us with this profound and deeply disturbing question. It just pushes the boundaries of how we understand identity, consciousness, and these unseen biological forces that can shape and ultimately destroy a life. It forces you to wonder, when a single body holds more than one consciousness, who is ever truly in control?